Greetings, greetings, everybody. Greetings. Can I just request the host that you make me co-host for the class so that we can start our meeting? Since now we are 15 minutes after our time. Uh, I now so that our the class will start that we continue. Is welcome to one maybe so that you can now start our classes.
Okay.
Teacher meeting.
Okay.
And
Okay, I can hear you. It's just a little bit staticky, but I think you are ready to start. So if you are, then we'll jump right into it. Um, just give me a sec here, okay? I'll put the
King Joseph, Kofi, please mute your mic. Please mute your mic. Thank you.
okay. Okay, the one who comes in peace is always welcome. The one who comes to teach is always welcome. The one who comes to learn is especially always welcome. Positive energy and creation energy to everybody here in this One Africa and Organic African Paradigm family. Today we'll be continuing the second chapter of The Pinnacle of Extraordinary African People. So we are going to jump right into our lecture so that we can use the time that we have wisely. So give me a sec here. I will put your presentation on the screen. All right. So the aim of this coming together is to educate the African people. This is a curriculum. This is the basic curriculum to help African people gain a sense of self, to know your history. One of the things you're going to learn about the African people's history in this school here is that the history is too long for one person to catalog or one person to teach. History is too vast. Out of all the people, all the nations on planet Earth, the African people have the greatest, most lengthy history out of every other group. So it is extremely, it would require about a million scholars coming together for you to create a good foundation for African people's history. But since we don't have those resources, we are going to start where we can. And so we are going to introduce you to the African people's history book. What does the history book look like? If you see this image, this is the actual image of the African people's history book. The original history of the African people is what everybody today call the Zodiac. This is their history book. So you can find this image at the Temple of Dendera, and within there are all the things that happened to the African people. Every advent here happened to the African people while they were on the African continent. And as time passed, they were so old, their empire was so old, and even before old was old, their empires were old. So the last remnants of their history is what we've been taught the last 300 years, the last 400 years, what we've been taught is what we've been trying to understand. But the vastness of the history is too much for you to just learn like that. So we are going to take bits and pieces out of the history, and this is why we call the history the pinnacle of extraordinary African history. The first chapter, we talk about colonization. We are going to talk about education. We are going to talk about economy, and we're going to talk about the foreign influence or the foreign conflicts on African soil. Chapter 1, we start with the 20th century. The 20th century is the period where colonization actually happened. After the Berlin Conference, it was a period of war. The period, it was a declaration of war. The nations of Europe gathered, and they came together and they formed a declaration of war against the entire continent of the African people. So the African people don't look at it as a declaration of war because a lot of Africans did not understand war the way we, but if you understand war the way the Chinese, the way the Japanese, the way the Arabs, the way the Asians understand, the way the Europeans themselves understand war, if you didn't think of war in the context, the mindset of the Africans, but rather the war, the way every group on planet Earth understands war, then what the Europeans did was a declaration of war against the entire African continent. So when they came into the African continent, they came in to settle. One, they came in to open Africa up, and they came for exploitation and to basically the primary mandate of the colonization was called the mandate to open Africa. Basically, we are going to start over here, the declaration of war against the African continent. So at Berlin, what they call 1884, the nations of Europe gathered together under something called an armistice. An armistice is a period of peace in something that Europeans follow when they don't want to fight each other, when they want to deal with an outside enemy, like someone they want to wage war against, but they don't want that conflict to come back to their homeland. So they create something called the armistice, a code of, they temporarily cease all conflict on their motherland. That means that no parties, none of the members of their motherland, their homeland, is going to wage a war on their soil. That means everyone's going to respect the law and they're going to deal with the outsiders. When they're done with the outsiders, then they're going to resume their internal conflict. This is their code of armistice. So when they went to Berlin Conference, it was primarily to prevent the war that was happening, that was going to come into Africa, to prevent that war from going back into Europe. Because let's say if a colony, if Germany is waging war in Namibia, and then England comes and wage that same join in, will these slides be available after the lecture? These slides I can put something together for all of you to use, but for now, these slides are part of the whole book, the whole curriculum. So I have to finish it, and then I will be able to give you the whole curriculum as one. But currently, we are going to postpone some of these things for now. So when they came to Africa, it was not just, oh, they are going to divide. No, it was to prevent war from coming into their country, one. So nobody could go bring the war that was going to happen in Africa into mainland Europe. One, that was the first thing. The second thing is that their mission was to open Africa. You know, I don't know if you want to, if you opening like picture something that is closed, like a box, and then you come and you take an axe and you break that box open. Picture a mountain that is closed and you crack that mountain open. Picture, you know, anything that is sealed off, a coconut that is sealed off, is encased in itself, and then you take an axe and you crack the coconut open. That's what they were coming to do. The main agenda was to open Africa, to split it open. All right. So the declaration of war against the African continent, the mandate was to open Africa for the commonwealth of all Europeans. So the commonwealth of all the European nations that were at Berlin, we are going to wage war against these people, open their lands so we can extract their resources for the commonwealth of our people. And that was the original agenda. So the goal is we don't bring this war back to our motherland. We don't bring this war back to our homeland. However, the war did end up in their homeland, but it did not end up because they were killing Africans, because they were committing genocide in Africa, because one group of Africans were fighting. No, that's not why the war went back into Europe. The war went back into Europe because of a different reason. So, first thing you need to take away for is the declaration of war against the African continent. That's 1884. The mandate of that declaration was to open Africa for the commonwealth of all Europeans. So modern Africans, we don't understand that the armistice that these people have, they have in their culture, they have an armistice. And this armistice is between the military powers of Europe, was a declaration of war against the entire African continent to protect mainland Europe, so the war that is going to happen in Africa doesn't spill into their homeland. Rather, they will limit the war to Africa only. So the goal was, we limit the war to Africa only, and we limit the casualties to the Africans only, but we don't bring it to our homeland. So they established the history. They have a long history of a code of armistice. Some of you don't know this, but there are multiple chapters in European history, like where they have a code of armistice. The first code of armistice on record is the princes of Europe uniting against the Mongolian invasion of Europe. That's when the grand princes of Europe, all of them, suspended their animosity towards each other so they could drive the foreigners out of their homeland. The second was the concert of Europe, where the peasantry of Europe, or the small people, were rebelling against the nobles, and the nobles came together and they say, you know what? We gotta all band together to stop these poor people from overthrowing the revolution. They band together to stop the revolution. So that is the second armistice, the concert of Europe. So they even have, during the Roman time, they had something called the Pax Romana, which means a peace within. They would establish the peace treaty amongst themselves so that they could be able to fight foreigners. So the African people, we don't have this culture where we have an armistice with each other so we can deal with outsiders. We don't have this, but they do. It's enshrined in European leadership, government. Their culture is enshrined where they can put their differences aside to deal with a hostile power. Okay? So temporary stopping of warfare and power struggle within Europe between all hostile parties to deal with an external enemy. Temporarily dealing with outsiders. The natural code of armistice is what Africans refer to as Berlin Conference, or the Concert of Europe, or the Greek Roman Berlin Conference nations. The Pax Romana, or meaning peace within Europe, or etc. We wage war against outsider, but not against our own. So all the advents following the Greco-Roman Berlin Conference, all the advents following that were all acts of hostility. Okay, all the acts of hostility are going to be directed against Africans. It's not going to be spill over into mainland Europe, just Africans themselves. So African people around the globe during this period, they are experiencing, or they're fighting for their survival. They're fighting, but to no avail, because the war itself doesn't go into Europe, it just comes to Africans. especially Africa itself, the invasion, the occupation, the vandalism of the resources, and also the genocides that happened in the process. So the war between Africans and, this is the acronym that I use to basically, sum the whole plot, is the GRBC nation. The GRBC nation is just the Greek Roman Berlin Conference nation. That's what it means. GRBC nations, this is a picture of all of them. At the arc of the 20th century, these group of men, they planned total domination of African people to crack open the African continent at the 1900s, to crack open the African continent like a coconut, and to draw all the resource out and direct it to Europe for the commonwealth of all Europeans, so that war cannot spill over. But, they ended up going to war amongst themselves, but it was not because of Africans. It was because of an assassination that happened that caused them to fight amongst themselves, but they didn't have no problem. So the wars of the 20th century tells you a lot about African people's state of being. From a lot of people when you study Africans' history, you have to understand the wars that were happening. And every time there's a war, there's a vast amount of trauma happening, and there's a vast amount of insecurity. There's a vast amount of uncertainty. There's a vast amount of things happening. So from this period, from the 1901 all the way up to when the Europeans ended their civil war amongst themselves, the Africans were fighting in a war of survival. So the Africans fight against the GRBC nations. It was in East Africa, it was in West Africa. There were conflicts like the Anglo-Somali War or the Dervish Rebellion. Now, they like to call it a rebellion, right? It's not a rebellion. It's literally a defending their nations. They were defending their nations against an outside people. So, like the British people would send expedition into every nation to see if they could conquer that nation. So they sent it to Somaliland, and there was a fight. So the British offensive against the Somali, and the Somalis they're called the Dervish, and they're the resistance. They're the ones who are fighting against this invader, this foreigner who's coming in to wage war against them. They're fighting against this foreigner. So this war happens within a 20-year period. Okay, so all of you know the maps of Scramble for Africa. Now, French Algeria, Italian Libya, British Sudan, kind of Italia, British type of Ethiopia, German East Africa, British Rhodesia, all these things here, Dutch South Africa, German Namibia, all of these, and Belgian Congo, these are what they came up with. So this is their, they say, okay, we are going to declare war against these people, and we're going to prevent this war from coming back to our own people. We're going to take all our mandate is to open Africa, all its resource, bring it back to our people for their commonwealth, but we cannot fight amongst ourselves, no matter what. So this was why you see there was a British Sudan, why you see there was a French Kanem, why do you see there was a German or French Mali. It was because of this. So they could not do it in their own homeland, but they had to do it outside of their homeland. Now, I put a link here. This link here can take you to all the countries that fought. Basically, if you go there, you're going to read, there's a whole list of Africans fighting against colonial powers. I could take you there and show you some of the stuff, but due to time, we're going to just leave that link alone. So in West Africa, March of 1900, 1901, the War of the Golden Stew is another war. And we know the person who caused the Asante people to stand up is a woman called Yaa Asantewaa. And she's even in the video that I showed. So the third Ashanti expedition, the Ashanti uprising, and all these other things happened within the first arc of the 20th century. So this is another war that happened in the beginning. So you can see that this kingdom of Ghana or Gold Coast or wherever it is, there is a lot of instability. People are dealing with war, families, women, and children are running around trying to find shelter, and these people are in the land. So we move on to another war. In Central Africa, the kingdom of, when I'm not even going to pronounce it, Ndoromo, or Wandu, they fell to the Belgian Congo. So, like, again, the Belgian came in there and they waged war against the African people. And after they defeated and weakened the African people, they were able to establish themselves. And this is when they were able to extract the rubbers out of the Congo during this time period. This is when they started to chop off the Congolese hands, chop off their feet, and put them into slave labors. This is when the Belgians did this. So, all these different groups, they were fighting against these people. So another group of people here is uh, the Zandi territories, such as the chiefdom of, were still under process of assimilation when the colonialists arrived, British Sudan. So we go to the British Sudan War. In Sudan, there is the British people and they are waging war against the various ethnic group of the Sudan. And these ethnic group, again, they say no to the British. They say, you cannot come into our land. You cannot establish yourself here. They literally said no, but they went to war. There was a war between them. And again, the British were able to, gain the advantage in this war as well. So everything that we Africans, when we talk about Berlin Conference, what you don't learn from any other history teacher, as they say, the partition of Africa. It's not a partition of Africa. It is primarily the redirecting of African wealth to Europe for European Commonwealth. That is what it is. How do we transfer all the wealth from African people to Europe so that European can have a commonwealth, but in the process, we do not fight war on the soil, our mother soil. How do we do that? If people are going to die in this war, these people cannot be our own people. These people have to be non-Europeans. So the vast amount of casualties in these wars are naturally Africans. So in every expedition that Europeans were moving from one part of Africa to another part, they didn't know the way around. They didn't know how to get from the kingdom of Ashanti to the kingdom of the Igbo people. They had no clue how to get from there to Congo, how to get from one place to another. So they needed Africans who know the way. They needed Africans who could give them directions, who could show them the way for them to get there, for them to do the thing. So the Europeans use a lot of African people. They gather from different parts of Africa. So they gather Africans from one part of Africa to another part who had been to that place, and that African was able to lead them. So all their infantrymen, their expedition men, everything they rely on it for African men. And the people who fought, who engaged the battle, when two groups met, it was always the Africans at the front line fighting another group of Africans. And then the Europeans would come in as they on the horses with the guns, and their soldiers would come in second. So the African men would go in first, clash with the Europeans at the beginning of the battle, and then the Europeans would come in second, and then they would basically, handle the fight. So the post-Berlin, where the European militaries came together in the Commonwealth of all European kingdoms, to fight in Africa, but not in Europe, they were not enemies. What made the Europeans turn against each other was after 1914, there was an assassination in their mainland, in their homeland. One man dies in their homeland, which started a great civil war amongst themselves. But it's not. Millions of Africans had died in their wars on the African continent, but it never triggered a war in their homeland. But the minute one of their person died, it triggered a catastrophic war in their homeland. So this is what I'm trying to explain to you. In Africa, they used Africans as human shield, as cannon fodder, like infantrymen constantly, and many Africans' blood were spilled African man left his wife and his kid in his village, went on a expedition with Europeans. He never returned, right? And this is how a lot of families were living in this Africa that was of the 1900s. You would go with them to go to a war against another group of African people, and you would fight and you would die in the process because you were on the front line. And then when it's time to return home, your family would never see you again. Your mother, your father would never see you again. So this is how they were able to colonize Africa. This is how they were able to win a lot of the war. They won the war by using first and foremost Africans as the human shield. And then after they used the Africans as the human shield, they went in and then they used the machine guns, etc. So the colonial invaders created a nervous system in Africa, like a nervous system, a primary communication channel and nerves where they could move as one group of people, but they could move Africans as pieces on a chessboard. That's what they did. They created a nervous system like a brain network where they could move one African from Ghana or one African from Sudan to Kenya, one African from South Africa to this. They could move Africans around the chessboard like pieces of pawns. They could move Africans from Libya to go all the way to Ethiopia to fight. They could move Africans from Somalia to go all the way to fight in this place. So that was their primary strategy, moving one African to another part of Africa to fight. So this is how they use it. They acted like a nervous system in Africa. So they were the primary communication channel, the nerves, and then they could move an African from one part of Africa to another to help them defeat another African group. So they call these Africans their allies. They call these Africans their alliance, right? But then in the end, they betrayed these same Africans, or they either promoted them for something, but either they betrayed these same Africans when the time came, or they promoted them to something. But from what I learned about the history, they betrayed most of the Africans who helped them in their conquest. And then only a few of them who stayed behind, they kept them in power. So people who embrace the European ways, like you would have to speak English really well. You would have to embrace the Christian religion. You would have to really be loyal to you would have to really embrace everything about them. And then that way you would become, they would keep you around. They wouldn't betray you because you become a loyal soldier in their institution. But you could never rise to the rank of general. You could never rise to any rank beyond infantryman, right? So this was the challenge that a lot of Africans had. So even though they were part of the armies, they could not move for higher part of the armies. So they were inscripted into the colonial armies. They were trained, and they were used as navigators, scouts, and they were used as infantrymen who fought very well. They were paid less wages because the Europeans were paid more, and they were given ranks in the armies, but never a rank higher than a general. But they had to be a Christian, mandatory. Every one of them had to be a Christian, mandatory. You could not be in the army if you were some kind of spiritualist. You had to be a mandated Christian for that to happen. So we go to what they call the Igbo land, the Anglo-Arochukwu War. So it's a conflict between a group of Igbo people. A group of Igbo people came together in the Aro Confederacy to resist or stand up against the British. The British wanted to go deep into their land, wanted to invade their culture, wanted to go and open their land so they could extract the resources. But the Aro people started to fight against the British. They tried to negotiate with them, but it didn't work, so they tried to fight them. After the war, the British hung their leaders. They grabbed all their leaders. They put them in a court, tried them, found them guilty of resisting the queen, and then they hung all of them to death. They put the rope around their neck and they hung them. So we go to, they call the description of the war, that type of war that the Africans was fighting against them, was called guerrilla warfare. So they call it guerrilla warfare. They said that the Africans use an unconventional method of war where they would hit and run. They would hit and run. They would attack them, then they would run away. They would attack and they would run away. So this was one style of warfare the Africans used when the Africans were powerless. When they didn't have enough power or enough allies to fight or enough strength to fight, they used guerrilla warfare. But when the Africans were confident that they could win, they would meet them on the battlefield and the Africans would win the first battle. So the Africans always won the first battle. There was almost every war that they fought against the invaders, the Africans won the first battle. But the Europeans came back with a larger machine guns and military equipment, and they were able to defeat the Africans the second time. So it's not the first initial conflict the Africans won. I mean, most of them the Africans won. But the second conflict, where they went and got more Africans from other places, they got more weapons, and when they came back this time, they obliterated the Africans. So we go to the British power over Egypt, the Anglo-Egyptian War, and this war led all the way up to the coup d'etat and the independence of both Egypt and Sudan. So that is another war that happened in the arc of the 20th century. Now, the Herero Wars, which happened in this part of Africa right here. So we have this part of Africa right here. This is where the Herero Wars happened. So again, these were another war against the Germans and, the people of the land being the rightful owner of the land. And the Germans, remember, I said they declare war against the African people and they just came to take over the land. And when the African people said, no, you can't take over our land, that's when the war waged into, it became. So the Africans didn't know they were at war until these people became really, really violent in the war. And that is when the Africans knew. So we come to, in Angola, the Baleado War was launched by the, I'm not even going to say that one, and its allies against the Portuguese. So the revolt was prompted by a sudden decline in the price of root rubber, pitting the indigenous population against the European immigrants and Aboriginal loyalists. And the revolt lasted from 1902 to 1904, ending in Portuguese victory. Basically, what happened here is the African people were these Europeans now, they are using Africans to go against one African, playing their mind games. But in this whole sense, they're constantly attacking. They're constantly going against Africans, and the Africans are fighting back. They're constantly fighting, but sometimes they win, and then sometimes the second time they meet again, they conquer them. So it's the first war encounter the Africans always win. Is the second encounter that's the problem. So again, 1903 to 1910, again more wars. The Dinka people joined the war. 1903, the Tigali people joined the war. 1904, the Sokoto Caliphate, they joined the war. The Kano Emirates, they joined the war, and there's just Africans are joining the war against these people. All of them are joining the war against them. So we go to Mali. Again, Africans join the war. We go to Namibia, more Africans join the war against the foreigners. So the Herero genocide is unique because the German military commander from East Asia Expedition Corps, these evil Germans came up and they said, it's time for us to exterminate these people. So they created some kind of order, extermination order, in which they were to kill every man, woman, and child. So every Herero man, woman, and child, it doesn't matter if you see them walking, they're not part of it, you should shoot them on sight. That was the order of the Germans. They should poison the rivers, they should poison the wells, they should shoot them on sight. So that is exactly what caused the Herero genocide. They were shooting man, woman, and child on sight. They poisoned the river. They did everything to the people owned the land. The people were there. They came, and then they were trying to remove the people out of the land. So that is why the extermination order happened. Now, we come to the Battle of Adwa in Ethiopia. Ethiopia had two wars against the colonizers. The first war, 1896, and the second war, 1935. And the Ethiopian people, their approach to the war was different from the other African people approach. So the Ethiopian people were already before that, they had already fought a war. And before that, the last king already unified the tribes. He went to all the tribes in Ethiopia. He said, you know what? There's some danger coming. We need to form some kind of alliance. He forced them into this alliance, and that alliance, the Emperor Menelik and other emperors before him kept that alliance going, and that was what allowed them to bring a heavy force. So when the Italians brought I believe they brought like 14,000 people to fight, the Ethiopian brought 100,000 soldiers, and they exterminated all the Italians. So it was a decisive victory for the Ethiopian army led by Emperor Menelik II against the Italian forces. The battle checked Italy's attempt to build an empire in Africa. Ethiopia's victory ensured its independence, making it the only African country to never be colonized. The Treaty of so-and-so, May 2nd, 1889, which included Italy's promise. Italy came to Ethiopia and said, hey guys, we are going to give you money if you let us, stay here. So this is one of the tricks they used. They came there with a document promising that they would give the Africans money, they would give them loan if the Africans, but the Ethiopians were smarter and they said no. And also the Ethiopians, thanks to a Russian who came to the country, the Russian government, the Tsar, sent an emissary to Ethiopia, and they formed an alliance with Russia. They were able to gather weapons, and they were able to use these weapons to also protect their land. The British refused to give the Ethiopians weapons. The French refused to give the Ethiopians weapons. Every European refused because it was a policy. You could not give an African weapon against another European nation. If you did that, then they would consider it an act of aggression. So you could not do that. So the only people who were willing to give Africans weapons at this time to fight were the Russians. And, it was one of the Russians came to Africa, tried to create a colony. He failed. He was arrested by the Russians, taken back to Russia. And when he was taken back, they sent someone to meet with the Ethiopians. This person was able to broker an agreement between the Ethiopian government and the Russian government, and they were able to acquire weapons to fight against the colonizers. So this helped the people of Ethiopia. But when the Europeans started their war on mainland Europe, things changed. Their allegiance changed now. They were fighting on their own home soil. So now, where they were trying to conquer the African people before, they were trying to destroy the African people. They switched their attitude from destroying the African people to destroying each other. But in exchange, they made Africans partner with them. Every African that was part of a colony was going to fight on their side. So if you were part of a French colony, you were drafted to fight for the French. If you were part of this colony, you were drafted to fight for that group. You were drafted. So the Africans were dragged into the European conflict again. So again, the Africans find themselves in wars they did not really, they were not part of. They were just being moved around again one more time but not on the African continent anymore, but mainland Europe. So 1908, 1914, France versus the Mossi Kingdom. Again, another war. The Wadi Sultanate War of Chad versus France. We have another war in Chad and France. In 1910, we have the Amaguni Bantu cattle herder versus the German Empire in the Southwest Africa. In 1910 to 1912, the Portuguese war against the Kasanji Kingdom in Central Africa. 1914 to 1917, Congo People Opposition and Revolt. 1914 to Angola, more wars. Again, the Avambo, the Ambo, or the Awambo, more wars again in Africa. So the Africans are fighting constantly. There's a period of warfare. So Southwest Africa, South Africa, Germans, Britons, Boers, all of these wars are being brought to the surface just in this period of African history. So one of the biggest defeat of the Portuguese, this is actually one of my favorite, it was the northern Namibia and the southern Angola group that waged the war against the Portuguese. and they were able to destroy the Portuguese. They defeated them in such a beautiful way, and that history is written. So it's not just that the African people were, they came in and they were colonizing. Yes, the African people were fighting the entire time. War right to left, war to right to left. The Africans were waging war constantly. So when we review the first arc of the pinnacle of extraordinary African history, we learn that the countless African men, women, teenagers experienced death in this age. So many Africans experienced death in this age. They experienced death by machine gun fire. They experienced death because these people would poison the river, the drinking water. They experienced death because these people were doing all types of shenanigans on the African soil. So the entire might and strength of the continent Europe came against the African people, and the African people were fighting, but the African people were fighting as individuals. So let me be clear, they were fighting as individuals. While the entire might of Europe were fighting against them, they were fighting as separate group of people. And this is why, even though the African could win one single battle, the African could not win the second battle because he didn't have a way to win the second battle. The European would just go to another African country, bring a lot of Africans from there to use them as the infantrymen, and then boom. So in 1928, the Baya Congo Wara multiple war against France and Germany in western region of Central African Republic and East Central Cameroon. There is more wars in Cameroon. 1929, 1930, the Women's War in the Igbo land. And we go to Kenya. We have the Mau Mau Wars and the British. So for 50 years straight, the African people are at war. And the tragedy of this whole war, this whole stage of warfare, is that the African people are used. They are being used as pawns against each other. They are being used as pawns, moving them from one piece to another. And so we go to one of the, let me see here, it says, I want to bring this thing to the front. All right. Eritreans also provided cavalry, artillery units. The Falcon Feathers was a prestigious, colorful Eritrean cavalry unit used during the invasion of Ethiopia. So Somali troops were used, Arab Somali were used, Libyans were used. Because they were trying to invade one African country, they went to Libya, grab Africans from there. They went to Somalia, grab Africans from there. They went to Eritrea. I mean, this is how they fought every African group. They fought them by going and grabbing Africans from another place to bring them to fight. So why did the African constantly lose? Well, for the most part, how did the African lose? The African lost because of this weapon you all see right here. So you see this weapon? This is the weapon that gave the Europeans the advantage against the African people, the technology. So what saved Ethiopia, the country, was Ethiopia was able to form an alliance with Russia temporarily, and they were able to gain some form of technology which helped them. But it was a policy of the Europeans to not give weapons to any African people, any African people. That was their policy, to make sure the African people are unarmed and they can never fight ever. That was their policy. So we can do whatever we want, but you cannot give them arms. So they were able to acquire some weapons from the Russians, and that was why they were able to, Ethiopia was able to hold its own. If had it not been for that opening and the Ethiopians being ready to take advantage of that and their ability to negotiate, they would have also fallen just like everybody else. So that is how the GRBC nations won against Africans. Misguided African allies, who didn't know better. And we can't blame them because they live in an age where every African was a tribal unit and every African came from a clan or a tribe or ethnic group. And that ethnic group was a unique ethnic group, was a sovereign ethnic group. It had no ties to another African people. So if they formed an alliance with the Europeans and the Europeans took them from Kenya and brought them all the way to Liberia, the Europeans had the power to do that. You take a Kenyan all the way from Kenya, bring him to Liberia. He doesn't know anybody there. So he's going to fight for the Europeans. So this is how they were able to win against Africans constantly, because they were able to establish, one, because of this weapon you see right here, and the second was because they used Africans as infantrymen. So now we are going to talk about the map that they created. This map is a trouble for so many African people today. So the map that they created for African people has become a problem. Even today, we have a Rwanda and a Congo issue, which should not be an issue at all, right? Which should not be an issue. If we go into our ancestral customary law, right, the original law of Africa is called the Dignity of Customary Law, or the Supreme Customary Law of the People. And this law, there are many, many things embedded in the customary law, which if you go into the customary law, technically, there are a lot of rules and regulations in the customary law of Africa. These type of borders would not be a problem. But because Africans don't know the customary law, remember, they were fighting for 50 years straight. There was no scholar. There was nobody there sitting with a pen and a book writing things down. Every African man, woman, and child was fighting. Every single one of them were on the battlefield. So nobody who had pen, nobody had paper who was writing things down. It didn't exist. The only people Africans who were free to use paper and pen were the ones that were converted to Christianity. And the only book they were allowed to use were the Bible. You know, they were not allowed to use any other book besides the Bible. They were allowed to preach the Bible. They were allowed to gather and debate the Bible. They were allowed to gather and argue about the Bible, about the religion, but they were not allowed to argue about anything else. They were forbidden from talking about politics. They were forbidden from talking about culture. They were forbidden from talking about science. They were forbidden from talking about every single thing. The only thing the Africans were allowed to talk about during this period by the colonials were, you could only talk about religion. You could only talk about religion. You Christian with a Bible, you could talk about religion with another indigenous African with a spiritual system. You could challenge them and you could debate them, and you could once you won, or you converted them, then you brought a victory to the faith. But you were not allowed to talk about anything else. The minute you as an African begin to talk about something that was not related, it was considered a threat to the colonial powers. And at this point now, you would become marked for death. So we see this by a man named Kibongu in the Congo. He starts his ministry, starts to teach about, but he starts to talk about unity, Congolese culture. He starts to talk about, and the Portuguese accused him of, basically they accused him, or the Belgium accused him of actually trying to start a rebellion against them. And he was marked for death at this point. So this is the theme in Africa for the first 50 years of the period. You could not, as an African, you were not allowed to talk about anything else, only the religion or the Bible. Man, woman, and child, you could not talk about nothing except religion. So 1900s, the map takes shapes and the changes and the boundaries begin to form. So this is when the Europeans established the map for us. At the crest of the 1900s, they established our geography. So we didn't establish the geography we have. They established that geography within the 50-year period of wars. They established our geography for us. They decided what everything would be called. They created everything during this 50-year period. So there are three types of wars. Africa was clans, ethnic clans, states, tribes, three types of warfare that the Africans fought. One type of warfare, some of them waged resistance. Some Africans waged resistance. They disagree immediately. They didn't want anything to be a part of it. Some Africans said, we don't want any part of you. We disagree with you. We don't want nothing to do with you. So they became resistance. Some Africans wage a struggle, like they were like, well, you are welcome, but we don't like, you. Some of them waged a struggle. Then some of them wage a victory war, like Ethiopia waged a victory war because Ethiopia formed a confederation, like the Arochukwu tried to wage a victory war. They formed a confederation or a unity. But what made Ethiopia wage a victory war was Ethiopia sought arms, alliance with foreigners, and they were able to acquire the necessary machines to fight. So this is the African continent here as it is today. This is the land that the people call Africans live on. This land you see here is without the lines, without the partition or the territories of the colonizers. So if you remove the territories of the colonizers, this is how the land looks. People can move right and left. People can do this. This is how the land has always looked from the time of the ancestors. The land looked like this. Then they came and then they created barriers between the Africans. And it didn't matter if your family was in this part of the barrier or your family was in that part of the barrier, they separated you. They separated you from your loved ones. They separated clan from clan. They separated people who customary law unites. So customary law unites these people, yet when the Europeans drew their lines, the people became divided. Customary law separated them. Well, not customary law, but European law separates them, customary law unites them. So like in Congo and Rwanda, they are united under customary law. Under ancestral law, they are united. But under European law, they are divided. So there's two laws at play here. Customary law is our ancestral law. They are united. By this land, they are united. But under European law, they are disunited. They are separate people on their own. So this is what happened to the African people. Now, a lot of Africans ask, what is the name of Africa? What is the name of our continent? What are our continent called? A lot of people come up with things like it was named after a Roman called Leo Africanus, Scipio Africanus. The continent was not named after anyone called Scipio Africanus. Scipio Africanus took over the territory of the empire of the Afric people. When he conquered when he defeated the Afric people through the treason of the Numidian, he was able to take the power. So the Afric were the Numidians, or the Phoenicians, the Carthaginians. These people are what we today call Nigerians, Malians, Chadic people. They are all part of that empire, the Moors. They were all part of this Afric army. They all went to Rome to defeat the Romans, and they all failed. And when they all returned back, they went into their deserts and their places, and they forgot about the wars. But these people, they are united. When they united to form an army to go overthrow Rome, they were called the Afric people. The Afric people. So the land itself, I've heard various people call it different names. One of the land I've heard the people call is Merita, the beloved land, right? Or the beloved fatherland. Then the Egyptians call it Tawer, the great land of Anhur. They call it the great land of Anhur. It means the bull who lifts the heaven. So the Egyptians themselves call it, or the Kemites call it, the bull who lifts the heaven, the land of the bull who lifts the heaven. So they call it, some of them call it Taweret, the great land of the mother Ret, or the woman who is part of the constellation, what's it called, Ursa Minor. So there is a sovereign of Africa. She's part of the constellation Ursa Minor. The continent is named after her as well. They call her that. But the most common name that everybody knows is the name Ethiopia. Ethiopia. The Greeks call it Ethiopia. Now, a lot of you have been told that the word Ethiopia means burnt face. You've been told that the word means burnt face. The word does not mean burnt face. That's a lie. Okay, if you don't read books, if you don't go into the language, the etymology, you're not going to know what the word actually meant. The word Ethiopia in its truest essence means the utmost divine heaven. So it is parallel to the Egyptian meaning. So the Egyptian meaning means the great land of Anhur, or the bull who lifts the heaven. That's the Egyptian call it. Then the Greeks call it Ethiopia, utmost divine heaven, the utmost imperial sky, or the bright upper sky, the land of the bright upper sky. This is what the word Ethiopia means. So I will do a translation for all of you here. So you see this continent that is behind? Let me show you the direct translation for this continent here. So the word Pia means utmost or great. The word Pia means either great or utmost. Okay? The word Theo means from a god or sacred or divine. That's the Greek word. Theo means sacred or divine or some kind of superhuman. And the word eighth means heaven. Okay? Upper sky, or the bright, the place where the stars are, the bright, the Milky Way. So the word itself is either the utmost divine heaven or the utmost heavenly divine emanation. That's what the word Ethiopia means in Greek, okay, and Phoenician language. So the land in the ancient time, the land was called Nyalubali. The land itself was called Nyalubali. Now it was limited to a small portion of Africa, but it was called Nyalubali itself. The African continent was called Nyalubali itself. Now this it can be found, the word can be found in the Luganda language. It means mother of the guardian gods, right? Or the guardian creators, or the guardian sovereigns. The Baganda believed that the lake was the source of power for their deities, and its fluid, transparent nature made it a place of divination and transformation. Well, that name is found in the Egyptian language as well. That name is found in the Egyptian language. So the Egyptian people call it the great land or of the pathways of rivers. The great land of the pathways of rivers. So look at this. You see this land? This is the pathways of rivers. So the great land of the pathways of many rivers. So that is why they call it by these different names. They call it the Garden of the Sun. The Garden of the Sun. They had various names for the land. And in every land, there's something called a geographical claim. You know, they call it a mandate, right? Europeans have their mandate. Africans, we have a mandate as well. What is our mandate? Our mandate was an oath between the individual or the group and the creator of the universe or the creator of the land. So our ancestors long ago, they made some kind of divine oath between themselves and the African continent. Long time ago, before me and you were even born or conceived or thought of. They created some kind of contract, spiritual contract with the land of Africa, the continent itself. And this gave them the geographical right to the land of Africa. So the land of Africa belongs to the African people by divine right, by divine contract with the universe or the creator or nature. So that is why all these things like the name of Africa is always associated with some kind of nature, some kind of or thing is always enshrining these. If you go look up the name, they will tell you, say it comes from the Greek word Africa, meaning the land that is free from cold and horror. If you go to the Roman, they say it's called Africa, sunny. If you go to the Phoenician, they say call it Afar, Afri, dust. If you go to the Berber, they say it's called Africa, means Africa, land of the Berbers, right? And we know the Berbers are an indigenous group of the deserts in Africa, or the lands in Africa, Algeria, Morocco, etc., etc. So the land, the word Africa in Egypt itself, the symbol for the spelling of Africa is the cowherd. A is the cowherd. The cowherd means a divine being or a deity. So the word, the A in Africa is that some has to do with a divine being or a deity. The F in Africa has to do with a fire or an eloquent speech, a podium of the highest wisdom, like a very high level of knowledge, okay? And it can also mean like a fatherly figure, all right? the RE in Africa, the word Africa, it means the gate or the door or the opening or the origin point. And the Ka means the spiritual strength or the spiritual power that comes from the will or the willingness, that which comes the spirit or the masculine and feminine spirit when they are joined. That's what Africa comes from. So there are ancient maps of the continent. And the ancient maps, they call the oceans around Africa, the West Ocean, the East Ocean, they all had a name, and they were called the Ethiopian Ocean, the Ethiopian Sea. And then the Europeans came and they changed it to the Atlantic Ocean, the Indian Ocean, the Southern Antarctica Ocean. The Europeans changed the name. So the names used to be the Ethiopian Ocean. But then they came in after the colonization period, they changed it. So people have many ideas. The Arabs used to call it the land of the blacks. The whole continent, they call it the land of the blacks. The Arabs also have another word for it called the Al-Kibulan. The Al-Kibulan itself comes from the word Nyalubali. Nyalubali is the Arabs' attempts to say Al-Kibulan. The Arabs attempts to say Nyalubali, and they say Al-Kibulan. So this is where you all get the word Al-Kibulan. Al is a word that is found in Arabic. And the Keb means land, and then Ulan, or it's an Arabic word or something. So what people are calling the Garden of Eden, the mother of mankind, it is just Nyalubali, which is the mother of the guardian gods, the mother of mankind, or something like this. Just means Nyalubali. So many people have gone into history books, they've read the found Al-Kibulan, and they've chosen that name to represent Africa. But Nyalubali represents Africa. Ethiopia existed before the Europeans. So there are other names that Africa has as a landmass, and I think I've reached at the end of my lecture. So we are going to stop here. I wanted to show you all the various maps. So this is the map that was first existed. So the land itself, what people call it for thousands of years, including in the Christian Bible, is called Ethiopia, right? Where a lot of people think that Abyssinia and Ethiopia are the same thing. No, Abyssinia is different. Abyssinia is not Ethiopia. Ethiopia is all this land right here. This is what they call Ethiopia, but that's just one name. Okay, there are many other versions of the name. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to let everybody come in. We are at the end of our session now. So it's the question Q&A time.
Thank you, Teacher Metri. Thank you so much. Thank you for the deliverance. Yes, all the audience for this platform, please, you can raise your hand and all have the time to go ask questions, so that we'll take questions, so that the teacher will have to ask. It's question time now. Yes, King Hussein, can you please come with your question?
Greetings, everyone here. Please, in fact, I was on transit. That's why I lately log in. So, in fact, I don't know. I'm requesting if I get the recap of this section, because in fact, the little I was able to get here, in fact, I am so much interested on it, but I didn't get enough. That's why I requested for if I can get the recap of the sections. Thank you.
Thank you. That you get from One Map Africa, you get from this team. You can contact me further for that. I will have to also share for those who want anything after. As the teacher have said, after our lessons, we'll get more from there. Yes, Mr. Kalonda, Kenny?
It's not really a question. First, thank you very much for the lecture, the true deliverance. And when we were young, at school, you usually have, most of us had a Christian first name, but there was a word in Swahili where we were saying, Njina ya Mutumbo, meaning your name from the womb. Today it was a great inspiration from, as you gave us the meaning of our continent, truly showing our true identity to deliver us from Mulan mentality. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. We'll continue with the question. Yes, Queen Actor.
Are you meaning me or somebody else?
Yes, yes, my ambassador, you can come in, my queen.
Oh, thank you very much for the session. Very informative. Greetings to everybody, especially to our lecturer. Now I'm getting more confused. Maybe I'm jumping the gun. I can see that the whole central there was called Ethiopia. And a Ugandan born. Now I'm getting confused because people tell us that, oh, my part, I'm from eastern part of Uganda. They tell us, oh, that I'm from Ethiopia. But yet now from this map, we are all Ethiopians. So please, can you clarify that, or maybe I'm too early in the history? Thank you.
Okay. The name Ethiopia did not belong to the country Abyssinia before. That was not their name. They took that name after independence. So kind of like Ghana took the name Ghana after independence, and kind of like some nations took new names. They took that name because the name was found in the Bible. So the Ethiopians were trying to, they were looking for a name, and they were looking for a description. So they found that this name was in the Bible, and because of their relationship that they have, and also the word Ethiopia has a meaning in their own language as well. But the name itself is it's over 3,000, 4,000 years old, right? It's over 4,000 years old itself. And the perspective which we get the name from, we get it from the Greeks, right? Not the modern Greeks that came into Egypt, but the ones before that, the ones who were 1500 BC, the ones who were with the Phoenicians. So they say that the whole land, it is called Ethiopia. The meaning itself is what you should be concerned with. It's not the word that you should be concerned with. The meaning itself is what you should focus on. So the meaning of, as I said, it means it means, I'm trying to think of it, it means like the utmost heavenly divine emanation. So it means like the womb of a woman, like people that came out of the womb of a woman. That's what it means. So it doesn't mean, it doesn't mean like the word Ethiopia is a word, but the meaning is what you should focus on. It means people who came from the womb of a woman, something like that. So the utmost divine emanation. I hope that helped. You came from the womb of a woman, so you should you should consider
Okay, teacher, it is not clear. So then, for example, yeah, I've understood the way you have explained. But now these migrations, I don't know which year people talk of migrations. The migrations. Like now, people, they say, oh, South Africa people are from DRC, they are from the north, and the Ugandans, the ones in the east, are from Ethiopia. So what I'm saying that, am I too early to pitch in with this? or maybe at a later stage you will bring in migrations?
We will bring in migrations later, but to ease your question, I will say we came from the lower north, the Sudan. All of us came from the Sudan. We began the inner migration to inner Africa after the empire collapsed in 900 BC. When the empire collapsed due to civil war, the leaders took their cattle and they started to migrate from the empire. They went back to the empire and they found the indigenous Africans living there and they settled with them. So there's the indigenous Africans are the short people. Those are people who are like 4 foot tall. They're the ones indigenous. The tall people, all of them migrated when the empire collapsed. They all moved back in and they, settled on the land and they forgot about whatever happened. They erased the history. They pretended like they never left. They were always there. And that was the end of it. Nobody ever talked about, oh, we left and then we came back. Nobody ever mentioned it again. But we all went back into inner Africa. Same way we all left inner Africa to go outside, everybody returned when the empire collapsed. I hope that helped.
Thank you,
Yes.
teacher.
Okay, I'm listening for the next question.
The closing remark for One Map Africa, and I thank all the audience and the teacher, so that we'll close our lesson for today. For One Map Africa, King Ibrahim, please come on board. Sorry, before King Ibrahim can come on board, King Akwago, please. King Akwago.
Okay, thank you so much. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, Teacher Mitri, thank you so much for the lecture. I followed you, but I am not so comfortable with the description of the wars, Teacher Mitri. You said Africans were being hired by Europeans because they did not master the terrain of Africa. So they could go to another part of Africa and get people there to come and fight other Africans in another part of Africa. And you said we shouldn't apportion blame. Well, were these people not, even sensitive enough to understand that they shouldn't fight people who look exactly like them?
Well, even if we assign blame, it will not do us any good at this time because all those people are in the grave. So the only thing we can do is say that, ignorance leads us to do the wrong thing. But when we know better, we do right. So they didn't know better. That's all there is to it. They didn't know better because so many of them gave their lives in wars that they did not start. So many of them gave their lives in wars that they were not really members of. So that's basically what I can say to ease that. And
okay, Teacher Mitri, thank you. I'm sorry.
I want to share this. This is the symbol for the African continent. So if you want to know how to spell Africa in the hieroglyphs, this is it right here. So as you can see, the African continent has to do with some kind of cattle. It is a land of cattle, is a land of many things, but when you say the word Africa, it has to do with cattle. So it doesn't have to do with a European, doesn't have to do with a Greek, it specifically have to do with cattle. The land of, yeah, that's all I wanted to add before we go.
Okay, so I wasn't just apportioning blame. I brought up that question because it is almost the same thing happening in the present Africa today, that they'll use Africans against Africans, yet we are still falling in the same trap. Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that explanation.
No, you're right. They still, because if they haven't found another plan, because this plan is keep working for them. So as long as the plan is working, what's not broken, don't fix it. If the plan is working and they're able to get away with it, then they will keep doing it. So the day they're doing it and they can't get away with it, they will change the plan to something new.
Thank you, Teacher Maitre. I have asked the King Ibrahim to come to do our close. Our session and they give us closing remark. King Akwago.
King Simon, I'm here, please.
King Akwago, you can just give us our closing remark for One Map Africa, and also thank our teachers to close our class for today.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, King Simon. All I can say is that these classes are wonderful. We thank you so much, Teacher Mitri.
King Akwago, I've seen there is Doris with a hand up. We can give Doris a chance, then you come on. You come on. Doris, please come on, then King Akwago will close. Yes, Doris, can you please come on? You can now talk. You can unmute your mic, then you can talk. Doris?
Thank you very much. The one who comes in peace is always welcome. Positive and creation energy to our teacher, Mpunzisi, and to all my brothers and sisters. And I would just like to share my regrets that I missed a lot of the content just because of a lot of towers in Zambia, internet towers are not working properly. But I would like to share just one small thing which I found quite impactful the other day. And this is that Africans, and this is slightly to the comments I've just heard about Africans fighting each other or going to fight other Africans. I read a comment, and some of my brothers and sisters may have seen it, which said that African people are the only people on the planet, the Black people, we are the only people on the planet who do not view ourselves as the image of the Creator. The Chinese people, they view themselves as the image of the Creator. Indians, the same. Europeans, the same. We are the only ones who don't see ourselves as we flowed out of the fluid darkness. And for me, this was significant because it is so true. So if we do not, as Africans, have this self-confidence of who we are, we're coming out of the great darkness, then we will easily go and fight one another. As Mpunzisi said in the beginning, when there is the armistice, there is the peace. The Europeans make peace pacts just for the sake of collectively fighting an enemy. You never see Africans doing this. So the more I listen to all of you, informed people, I become very, very sad indeed. Thank you.
Oh, you shouldn't be sad, sister. We are here trying to make that right. So do not let this
happen. For the comment. Thank you for the comment.
Thank you. The one who comes in peace is always welcome. The one who comes to teach is always welcome. And the one who comes to learn, it's always welcome. And thank you, Teacher Matrix, for the lesson, for the lecture, and the contribution, and for the deep insight that you brought today in the class. Going straight to the point is that the lecture, it's today remind us the situation that we are facing, especially in Congo at the moment, where the whole world, it's concentrated in Congo. It's a scenario, actually, it's a scenario of Congo today, that the main players, unfortunately, um, continue to be us Africans, but doing our bad player there by the side of enemy, instead of identifying enemy and then tap to our strengths and repel to enemy. We are playing the music of enemy and dancing accordingly. So this is especially sad. However, I've been observing all of this movement through Africa, and I reached a conclusion that it should be a sort of something that has been built, something else, maybe in a dimension that is not so visible. So when teacher is bringing today the issue of pact that the European would be doing between themselves about a special subject, that they're excluding the victims, that after the pact they're gonna attack them. It's getting much more clear that the Africans lack the knowledge of the strength that the pacts have. Pacts, they operate in other dimension, which is not this material dimension. It's not agreements, and not these formal agreements. These are pacts. So I see today African suffering due to lack of coming together, unity among themselves, and I perceive and I understand that we are lacking the sense of pact, in a sense of a deep spiritual understanding, that the pact should be done at spiritual level, and then we bring it up to reality. Sometimes we'll have to maybe teacher will have to bring specific lessons on how we should be structuring pacts of Africans to formulate a common objective and make that objective surfacing and get that applied materially, because this is what they're doing today. So thank you very much again for the lecture. It was an eye-opener. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's now over to you, King Akwago.
Yes, Simon.
You can now give our closing.
Simon, may I say a word?
Yes, my queen. You
Thank you very much, Teacher Mitri and everybody in the house. Today's lessons was incredible. and I really have taken a lot. What we ought to understand is, just like Europeans and Chinese, we don't have the best history. Don't expect to come to this house and have kisses and hugs as history. We don't. Some will be very ugly. You might not even want to hear about it, but this is what we have. And the reason we are actually learning this is for our own good. So we can actually look at the ones we can actually learn from and the ones we can leave behind. Even with slavery, we are not teaching ourselves slavery so that we can attack. We are teaching ourselves. So it's important that we learn the history in order for us to be able to protect ourselves and also learn something. Yeah, and the next generation too. So I just want to say thank you. And let me also, my sisters and brothers who were not able to begin with us, now this class is actually on live because we are on YouTube. And so when you go to YouTube, you just have to type One Map Africa, and you're going to get everything that we have over there. Even last 2 weeks, the lessons that we had is over there. So you can actually have everything concerning us on YouTube. Yeah, so those who were not able to join us earlier, you can have the sessions over there. On Saturday, we are actually celebrating African History Month, though we have actually titled it Black History Month, but it's an African History Month. And we're going to have a lot of speakers on this conference. In this conference, it's actually to inspire and to also educate us about our past, our present, and the future. We're going to have our father, Joshua Maponga, Uma, Queen Ericana. We're going to have a lot of our Pan-African fathers and mothers in the house. And so you can find the link, the Zoom link, you sign up and on Saturday and Sunday. So it is Saturday, Sunday. That's when the event is actually going to take place, 6 p.m. GMT. It's actually 12 p.m. GMT to 6 p.m. GMT within these 2 days. So try and join us in the house so we can actually build this African table together. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you in the house. Thank you. Thank you, Teacher Mitri. Thank you so much. Kingakwago?
Thank you, Pinachula.
All right, thank you.
The one who comes in peace is always welcome. The one who comes to teach is always welcome. The one who comes to learn is especially always welcome. Positive and creation energy to you all, my brothers and sisters, and to Mwalimu, Teacher Mitri. It was a wonderful session being here, and my first request to all of us here is to make sure that we follow up 2 or 3 people to attend the next session. I just believe that we suffer a lot because we know very little, and we really need to emancipate as a people, the African people. In 2 weeks' time, there is going to be another session. Please don't miss. Make sure you come. You don't only share the links when you see them, but make sure you follow 2 or 3 people to join with you. On this note, we say have a wonderful time until we meet again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the lecture again. Once more, Teacher Mitri.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. See you all.
Good night. Good night, everybody.
Well, good evening, depending on
Thank you. Thank you all.
Do have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Teacher Mitri.